Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be counting down our top 10 favorite coffees from 2021. Now, just like last year, we're going to be breaking this up into a two-part series. Today we'll feature coffees 10 through 6, as well as our honorable mentions list. And tomorrow we will be featuring coffees 5 through 1, as we want an opportunity to discuss those coffees a little further in depth. Now, the rules and guidelines for this video series are just like they were last year. We're only allowed to use the same coffee roaster twice in the top 10 list, as well as the same coffee origin twice in our top 10 list. And when it comes to our honorable mentions list, we're allowed to use as many of the same coffee roaster or as many of the same region as we would like. And there is going to be a video review for each and every one of these coffees already up on this channel, with one notable exception, and that's going to be in part 2. So we will discuss that when we get to part 2 and that coffee. And throughout this video, I'm going to be sipping on this washed Qunqna from Tim Wonderbow because why not? And let's go ahead and start discussing our honorable mentions list. And all of these coffees are in alphabetical order, so we will start with the first one, which is the Bombe Layered Ferment Processed Ethiopia from Onyx Coffee Lab out of Bentonville, Arkansas. We have the Dilgi Chelbesa Wash Processed Ethiopia from Kopi Coffee out of Helsingborg, Sweden. The Eusebio Venturim Wash Processed Brazil from Say Coffee Roasters out of Brooklyn, New York. The Fabio Leo Garcia Lactic Wash Processed Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters out of Rotterdam, Netherlands. The Geisha Village Lot 50 Honey Processed Ethiopia from Sweet Bloom Coffee Roasters out of Lakewood, Colorado. The Karatu Peaberry Wash Processed Qunqna from Bolt out of Providence, Rhode Island. The Kianjege Wash Processed Qunqna from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. The Los Chalazos Wash Processed El Salvador from Sweet Bloom Coffee Roasters. The Rambagira Wash Processed Rwanda from Makina Coffee Roasters out of Coatesville, Pennsylvania. The Rosendo Domingo Wash Processed Guatemala from Calendar out of Galway, Ireland. And the Rabongayo Wash Processed Sumatra from Sweet Bloom Coffee Roasters. Alright, let's go ahead and start with number 10, and in 10th place we have a tie, and I promise that this is the only tie on this video, as we have two coffees right here, the Los Guachipiles Wash Processed Mexico from Roseline Coffee Roasters out of Portland, Oregon, and the Mario Moreno Wash Processed Honduras from Passenger out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And let me explain why I put them both in the 10th place spot, and it is a lot because these coffees kind of mirror each other in an interesting sense. So the Guachipiles, which is probably my favorite wash processed Mexico, it's probably my favorite Mexican coffee that I've ever had a very distinct sort of brown candy characteristic to it. And they had butterscotch, and I would definitely say it was butterscotch. And then the secondary component was this kind of slight stone fruit. And then as we're looking at the Passenger coffee, it kind of mirrored that in a sense. You had a much more vibrant stone fruit and a much more slight brown candy taste to it. So these coffees had a lot of similarities, but were kind of mirroring each other. I was a huge fan of that Mario Moreno, as well as I found it to be wonderfully clean and a great bit of sweetness, a very lovely stone fruit in that cup as well. So seeing these two coffees kind of mirror each other, coming from two of my 5 favorite American coffee roasters, I couldn't leave one of them out of the top 10 list, and therefore both of those are featured in our top 10. All right, coming in 9th place, we have the Qunqna number 2 Honey Processed Ethiopia from Say Coffee Roasters, and I went back and watched every single one of these videos to kind of refresh my memory on all of these coffees, and I said in this video that I didn't see this one finishing in the top 10, but kind of looking back on it, could be a slight bit of recency bias, or it could be the fact that I don't think Ethiopia necessarily had the best year for me, as there are very few Ethiopians featured even in our honorable mentions list. Now, Say had a wonderful year. I was really impressed with so many of Say's coffees, and this one was one of the ones that I was most impressed by, as it had so many of my favorite characteristics that come from coffee in general. Sweet, clean, light-bodied, and a lovely bit of florals in this cup, as well as a fair bit of sweetness too. This coffee was acting very much like a Geisha, and I was pretty blown away by this coffee, and it definitely justifies its spot, as I would consider this one sweeter and a little bit more unique than a lot of the other Ethiopians that I'd had this year, so I think that this is a wonderful cup of coffee from Say. Coming in at number 8, we have the Takesi Geisha Wash Processed Bolivia from Coffee Collective out of Copenhagen, Denmark. And this is the first ever Coffee Collective coffee that really wowed me. I was really impressed by this coffee. It was one of the first coffees we had actually reviewed this year, and thinking back on it, watching that video, I remembered the wonderful sweetness that was coming from it. This epitomized everything that I really like about Geishas. It had that super clean base, which paves the way for the lovely florals to come through, as well as some very nice citrus fruits. The sweetness, while at a level 3, I even said in that video that it could have been bumped up to a level 4. It was a pretty sweet cup of coffee, once I got the coffee right, I was really impressed by it. The biggest issues I think I had that kind of held it back from finishing higher on this list was the fact that it took a little time to get this coffee right. And then when I did get it right, I was already out of this coffee. I think I finished it around day 20, 21. So I feel like I missed out on the best of this coffee. And even then, it left such a positive impression that I couldn't help but leave it in our top 10 favorite coffees of the year list. Coming in at number 7 is the Ruby Batian Natural Processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor out of Arendal, Norway. And this is a much discussed coffee on this channel this year, as not only was it featured as a individual review, but then it was also part of the Cafe Box Advent Calendar, where it took second place in the entire Advent Calendar. And oh boy, I have so much to say about this coffee, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So it took me a little bit of time to get this coffee right. And after running it through the Chemex a couple of times, and then finally running it through the V60, I was just getting this really divine cup of coffee. Some very strong purple candies right off the front, and then it finished off into a stone fruit. And I've mentioned so many times, a lot of these coffees, the reason they're on this top 10 list is because of the strong stone fruit that was coming from them. But in addition to having some wonderful peachiness, it did have some wonderful dark fleshy fruits as well, most notably that plum. I even said in that video that it was the most distinct plum I think I had ever had from a cup of coffee, and having it a second time, being lucky enough to have this cup of coffee a second time featured in that Cafe Box Advent Calendar, it just refreshed my memory on how much I enjoyed this coffee. It was difficult to figure out where I wanted to place this coffee, as it was a little different. It was a little out there. It had some additional characteristics to it that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but even then, just the wonderful and unique flavor that was coming from this coffee definitely justified its spot in our top 10 list. And then coming in at number 6 is the Rigoberto Herrera Hybrid Wash Processed Colombia from Sweet Bloom Coffee Roasters. And a little spoiler alert, this is the only Sweet Bloom coffee that will finish in our top 10 coffees list, as Sweet Bloom's had a very interesting year. They've had some of my least favorite coffees I've ever had from them, including the Jose Hernandez, but at the same time, I wanted to take this opportunity to touch on the coffees featured in the honorable mentions list, the Ribangallo, as well as the Los Chalazos, and I thought their Uraga was a really nice cup of coffee as well. So they definitely maintained their spot as one of my favorite coffee roasters in the entire world, because they did have some wonderful gems. Most notably, both of those, the Ribangallo as well as the Los Chalazos, reminded me of some very sugary kind of junk foods, the Chips Ahoy and the Milky Way. Yeah, those were on point. Those were wonderful cups of coffee. But this one right here was a standout from Sweet Bloom for this year for me. And that's for a number of reasons. This is one of the first cups of coffee that they've ever taken kind of an experimental approach to. They're usually a little bit more traditional, your washed, your naturals, sometimes your honeys, and sometimes even your lactic processed coffees. But this one right here, the fact that they were able to hit the mark on it was wonderful. It did earn the level 5 for sweetness in my tasting wheel, as well as having some wonderful clarity to it as well. It reminded me a lot of rock candy, and there are quite a few coffees in this list that reminded me of wonderful rock candy. But in addition to that, it had a kind of like milk tea component to it, this taste to it that was really nice. It was unique on its own for a Sweet Bloom coffee, and it did give me faith that when it comes to a lot of the higher end stuff, Sweet Bloom can still definitely hit the mark with some of their more impressive coffees throughout the year. So yeah, that right there is our honorable mentions, as well as 10 through 6. Of course, we will be returning tomorrow to discuss our top 5 favorite coffees of the year. So if you've tried any of these coffees, or if you agree, disagree with any of the coffees on this list, please let me know. I love your feedback, especially when it comes to something like this, for a list like this. If you're new to the channel, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, as of course we have a lot of coffee reviews coming up throughout the next year, so just keep an eye out for some of those. But yeah, this right here has been the first part of our top 10 coffees of 2021 list. Thank you for watching.